The marbles, spheres of fate, instruments of cruelty. Hark, a marble, a perfect sphere, mirroring the completeness of fate and the grim cycle of existence. Like life's capricious course itself, these orbs roll with unpredictable abandon, yet ever bound by the cold, hard laws of physics, their transparency a cruel jest. For we gaze upon our destiny, yet cannot seize it. Marbles, once the emblems of childhood's innocence and the sweet joy of play, are here transformed, by some infernal alchemy, into instruments of death, a profound dramatic irony where childlike bliss is made the harbinger of doom. Players, given a phantom's choice, must choose their partners, each decision a macabre dance with destiny, where every marble becomes a physical manifestation of the stark binary of life and death. This twisted game's rules transmute the bond of friendship into a zero-sum reckoning, and possession of these humble spheres becomes, in effect, a monarch's sway over the fate of others. The transfer of these seeming baubles betokens the transfer of power, and those who, with a cold, calculating heart, such as Sang-woo, can manipulate these rules, shall ascend to the advantage, while these very marbles, these once innocent toys, become a tangible manifestation of trust between doomed souls, each exchange mirroring the making of promises. Yet the cruel machinations of this pitiless game force the betrayal of all such vows, and so, the metaphor of the marble, in this ill-starred fourth act, serves as a most potent device, encompassing the grand themes of this stage play, the rapacious maw of capitalism, the illusion of choice, and the darkness that dwells in the hearts of men, a stark reminder that even the most guileless experiences can be corrupted by the cruel engine of the system. Night. The mask falls. Beasts arise. Now comes the night, a curtain falling upon all pretense of civility, a realm where darkness, both literal and figurative, obscures the boundary between right and wrong, and the absence of light parallels the absence of any watchful authority, a subtle nod to the omniscient eye of Big Brother, revealing the bestial nature that lurks beneath the fragile veneer of civilization. As Deok-su's barbarity emerges most fully in this realm of shadows, rendering the dormitory a metaphor for human nature unleashed, for 'tis the guards, these automatons of the game, who deliberately dim the lights amidst violence, revealing a twisted truth that the night watch enables rather than prevents chaos, using the darkness itself as an instrument of control, the very darkness a manifestation of the internal moral wrought within each soul, forcing each to confront their own capacity for evil, where the physical darkness mirrors the psychological shadow states we strive to hide from the world, and from ourselves. Night, in its grim and egalitarian manner, equalizes all social distinctions, and this darkness begets a temporary anarchy, wherein the privileged, like Sang-woo, lose their carefully cultivated veneer of civilization. Thus does the night in this fourth episode serve as a cruel crucible, revealing the true nature of each character. And just as photography requires the darkroom for the image to fully develop, so too does night develop our true understanding of who these players truly are. The darkness does not create their inner nature, but rather it reveals what was always present, yet carefully concealed beneath the bright light of social convention. The use of night, therefore, transcends simple stagecraft and becomes a grim meditation on humanity stripped bare of all constraints. 'Tis especially telling that the guards allow this darkness, suggesting a twisted design, for seeing the true nature of the players is all a part of this cruel game. The doctor, healer turned butcher, betrayer of oath. Behold the doctor, once a purveyor of life and health, now chillingly perverted into a dealer of death, a representation of all that is vile in the corruption of professional ethics, where the Hippocratic oath itself becomes a bitter mockery. He, a bridge betwixt players and guards, embodies how once noble institutions can become slaves to the power structure, his privileged station highlighting the vile system of inequality that festers within the game. He transforms the human form from subject into mere object, the harvesting of organs the ultimate act of commodification, where medical knowledge is employed for cold profit rather than the soothing of pain, where his own skills become commodities for bartering for survival, and all. Knowledge becomes a form of currency, representing privileged access to power through expertise. Yet mark well, despite his vaunted abilities, the doctor remains ultimately expendable, a demonstration of how this pitiless system will consume even those who enable it, his death. Then, a grim reminder that in this arena, no player is truly special. The doctor's character serves as a powerful metaphor for the rot of institutional corruption and the commodification of human life, and his story arc is a testament to how professional knowledge can become a weapon against dignity, while his end reveals the futility of complicity with corrupt powers. His presence in this tale is not merely the story of one man's fall, but rather it illustrates how entire professional classes can become complicit in such violence, while maintaining a facade of legitimacy, and how organ harvesting becomes a literal representation of capitalism's brutal extraction of value from the human form. The doctor's role, a cynical scrutiny. The doctor, as a symbol of all that is rotten within our hallowed institutions, demonstrates how the temple of medicine can become a handmaiden of inequality, and that his participation in the gruesome work of organ harvesting eerily mirrors the medical exploitation we all know occurs in our own world. His presence in this vile scheme illustrates how healthcare has become, in many ways, a mere privilege for the few, rather than the basic right of all, and that access to information within these systems has become yet another means of oppression, the organ harvesting itself a chilling symbol of the commercialization of healthcare, where knowledge becomes a commodity for trade rather than the public good, and his actions serve as a mirror upon our own world's allocation of medical resources, where even death itself becomes a business, mirroring the grim efficiency of our own profit-driven healthcare systems. The pressures of economics here have corrupted professional ethics, and his compromise reflects the corruption of institutions, and how they all too easily normalize the unethical as if it was mere procedure, thus highlighting the fragility of professional ethical codes when faced with extreme conditions, and his special status is a mirror to the very same hierarchy in healthcare, and his relationship with the guards reveals how the power structures within our institutions maintain their control. His treatment of the other players shows the inequities within our own healthcare systems, and his eventual disposal shows how ultimately even privilege can be made expendable. His clinical distance from his victims mirrors our own society's medical detachment, and the organ harvesting becomes a metaphor for how our society treats the human body as nothing more than a resource, revealing the ease with which we allow medical objectification to enable ethical violations, while also reflecting real and constant concerns about medical dehumanization. The doctor's character arc is a microcosm of the larger systemic issues in all our hallowed institutions, in that he is a mirror, revealing how systems corrupt individuals, and not the reverse, and how privilege within corrupt systems is ultimately a cruel illusion. How these institutions normalize unethical behavior as simple procedure, where expertise can so easily be co-opted by power, and where ethics erode slowly, almost without our notice, and where specialized knowledge is too easily used to exploit the weak. They are all systems that can make even violence seem routine and necessary, where professional distance enables cruelty, and a clear connection between medical and economic violence becomes clear. Therefore, the doctor's story arc is a sharp critique of medical institutions that become complicit in this violence, all the while maintaining their veneer of legitimacy, and where his death indicates that even the enablers of these systems will ultimately become their victims themselves. And finally, what do we take from this? Think of such things as the distribution of medical resources, the accessibility and privilege of such resources, the commodification of medicine, the objectification of the human form, the patient's loss of dignity, and the institutional corruption within healthcare. It is here that we see a stark illustration of how our systems can corrupt even the noblest of professions, reflecting the broader issue of how such systems normalize unethical behavior through bureaucracy and that all too familiar professional distance. Food, the currency of survival, the measure of man. Food here is no mere sustenance, but rather it is the very currency of this macabre micro-society, where the control of its distribution reflects the control of people themselves. In this, Deok-su's hoarding is but a reflection of our own resource inequality, and it is his deliberate creation of scarcity that triggers the violence he so readily employs. And it is here that basic needs override every social bond, while the collapse of the shared meal system represents, without question, a societal breakdown. The guards are revealed as manipulators, using food as a tool of control, deliberately reducing rations to create chaos, while also transforming food into a mechanism for natural selection, where the very act of sharing food represents what remains of humanity, and where the act of stealing marks the moral corruption of man, and where hunger, itself, reveals the true character of all. The distribution of food, or the lack of it, also mirrors the socio-economic inequality of the world outside this pit, where some players seek to recreate hierarchical structures and where survival's most basic needs become luxury items. In this light, then, the role of food serves as a brutal metaphor for how systems of power can weaponize the scarcity of resources to create conflict among the oppressed, while simultaneously breaking all social bonds, forcing the desperate to make moral compromises, and all the while revealing hidden aspects of each individual, and ultimately, it allows them to maintain their overall system of control. It is a mirror to our own world where we see food insecurity used as a tool of social control, and where resource distribution reveals the power structures that hold us all, and where even the most basic needs are used to manipulate, and that scarcity drives social breakdown, and that all forms of survival will always overshadow the concept of any kind of morality. Teams, a pact with the devil, a cruel illusion of unity. These teams, forged from the furnace of cruelty, represent nothing more than artificial alliances formed from a state of duress, each a reminder of how external pressure creates these fleeting, temporary bonds, and they highlight the grim paradox of having to compete while cooperating, where Deok-su's team embodies raw power and intimidation, and Gi-hun's team represents strategic diversity. All the while, team formation reveals the natural social hierarchies that exist in such a brutal situation, with leadership emerging from either brute force or, in a very few cases, a form of consensus. All of these teams becoming a necessary evil for the hope of survival, and a constant reminder of how individual weakness can so easily be overcome by collective strength, and how strategic calculation can overpower pure physical power. They reveal the cruel irony of unity within a zero-sum game. The formation of these teams, therefore, mirrors the machinations of workplace team dynamics under our capitalist system, where our systems force cooperation even while promoting an overall sense of competition, and it reveals how privilege and disadvantage so powerfully affect team formation, and demonstrates how a crisis of this magnitude reveals both the social bonds and also the deep divisions within. And it is here that we see a tension that has been drawn between individual survival and that illusion of team loyalty, and how these teams force the choice between self-interest and a collective good, and how group dynamics influence all moral decisions, and how the true nature of man is so readily revealed through team interactions. Therefore, the treatment of teams in this episode serves as a microcosm of our broader social structure, wherein cooperation exists within competition, where the interests of the individual and the whole are often in conflict, and where power always dictates social organization, and where trust has become both an essential and also incredibly dangerous concept. Organs, the commerce of flesh, the depths of depravity. Organs, in their stark and terrible reality, have been reduced to mere commodities, their value limited by the use they have as harvested parts, with the very human form reduced to a checklist of potential profits, where the price tags remain a permanent fixture upon all flesh. Here, we see that multiple layers of corruption work in perfect unison. The guards, the doctor, and the outside buyers all become part of this chain of depravity, revealing how systems enable exploitation, and how death itself becomes a profitable business, turning the art of healing into the act of harvest and medical knowledge into a tool for profit, thus creating a healthcare system that has become a predator, where scientific detachment is nothing more than a means for enabling cruelty, and where poor bodies are harvested for the benefit of the wealthy. This is a mirror to real-world organ trafficking, where economic desperation drives such sales, where the human body becomes the very last economic resource. Here we see the multiple layers of authority involved, a system designed to enable the harvest and to create a world where death is industrialized and commodified, and where bureaucracy becomes a mask for unspeakable atrocity. And in that organ harvesting subplot, we see in perfect clarity how systems commodify human life and the connections between medical and economic exploitation, and all the ways institutions normalize all forms of atrocity, and the links between poverty and bodily exploitation, and how bureaucracy always enables the worst forms of evil, and ultimately, how all of this connects to the larger themes of capitalism's commodification of all life, the inequality within our healthcare systems, the institutional corruption that is so common, the class exploitation that has become a constant, and finally, the bureaucratic evil that permeates our world. Glass. Transparency's deceit, the fragility of order. Glass, so clear and unforgiving, here represents the visible but ultimately impenetrable barriers that define this brutal world, and how the rules themselves can be both clearly defined and also deadly, in the way they expose the illusions of fairness inherent in this game, while highlighting how visibility does not equal understanding. For in this context, even glass shards become weapons in the night fight, and we see how beauty and danger so easily coexist, how the thin veneer of civilization shatters at a single touch, and ultimately how fragile all forms of social order truly are. And that glass, here, separates the players from the guards, thus representing the invisible but ever-present class divisions that so clearly divide them. And in its very transparency, the glass reveals the oppression that defines this world, as well as a clear view of the inequalities that divide it. And the glass offers nothing more than a false illusion of safety, as its very visibility is designed to create a sense of vulnerability, where what was meant to be protection transforms itself into a weapon, and security itself becomes a source of imminent danger. The crucible of Episode 4, A Dark Mirror. In summation, all of this reveals that Episode 4 is indeed the moral crucible of this series, where the nature of the game crystallizes through a perfect storm of elements. The marbles as tokens of life and death, the night revealing the darkness of man, the corruption of the medical profession through organ harvesting, the use of food to control the desperate, the cruel choices forced upon the team, and the glass that shows us the deceit of all transparency. And this episode, in its methodical way, strips away every layer of civilization, our physical security through the starvation, followed by our social bonds through forced team building, our professional ethics through the corruption of the doctor, our own dignity through the selling of our body parts, and finally our moral certainty through all the terrible choices we must make to ensure our survival. And it reveals the multiple layers of exploitation within, the official game layer, the team challenge, the shadow economy, the organ harvesting, the social dynamic, the food and power struggle, and the moral battleground, the conflict between individual and collective survival. This, then, is where the characters can no longer maintain any moral ambiguity, where Deok-su fully embraces his own brutality, where Sang-woo calculates his way to safety, where Gi-hun struggles against his own inner darkness, where the doctor willingly sells his soul, and where the guards reveal their very complicity in all. This episode, therefore, acts as a microcosm of societal breakdown, illustrating how systems so easily corrupt even the noblest of intentions, and the brutal illusion of choice within our capitalist system, and how it allows the commodification of all human life, and the fragility of all social contracts, and ultimately, the true cost of survival. Here, the series establishes the deep moral compromises that will haunt every character until the very end, setting up the character arcs that can never be undone, and moral debts that will have to be paid, while allowing a critique of systems that only grow sharper, and finally, to ask those questions that have no clean answers, for this episode acts as a mirror, reflecting not only the terrible choices of the characters within, but also the terrible compromises that all of us make each day, with our own systems of violence and inequality, and begging the question of at what point does survival become too costly? What is the price we are willing to pay for our own complicity? And are we not, in the end, all playing a game whose rules we never truly chose to accept, a game where the systems of power will corrupt and consume all within, regardless of initial moral standing? Through these brutal and interwoven layers, the physical brutality of the glass, the psychological warfare of the team's formation, the moral corruption of medicine, and the systemic violence of organ harvesting, Episode 4 becomes the point of no return, where the game ceases to be about survival alone, and becomes a grim mirror reflecting the way that all systems of power will corrupt and consume all within them, regardless of whatever moral footing each may have started from.